Hey everyone, it's Alex, and welcome to the Marvel Snap Decks of the Week, the weekly series where I showcase the top 10 best decks in Marvel Snap. Now, actually, this week we have 11 because we've got a bonus deck to talk about, but there's a couple decks in here that are absolute surprises and archetypes that are showcasing fantastic statistics based on untapped data that we have available, so I can't wait to showcase some of these decks to you today. So let's get started. Right off the hop, hitting the like button is the best way you can support this content. And we're going to start with a special mention. This is one of the highest cube rate versions of Aram right now, but it has a low play rate of just above 200 games played. So this is a brand new deck emerging into the meta. Those statistics can shift wildly, but we're not seeing Aram decks cracking like past 20 cube rate, right? So 41 is a massive outlier, and it also features M'Baku and Uatu the Watcher. So I had to showcase it, okay? Whether it's pure hopium, I mean, that time will tell, but in terms of today, right now, at this moment, statistics are showcasing a 58% win rate and a 0.41 cube rate on 200 games played. So I wanted to show it to you because, I mean, it does have Loki, it has a Nick Fury generation with Coulson, but it has a lot of funky stuff in there too. So I want to showcase to you as a special mention in the event that you're interested in trying a new and emerging deck that just might be an absolute fantastic list. Now we go into the proper top 10. Well, these decks have more data on them, and coming in at 10 we have Sandman. A 4-8 cube rate is very high at a 55% win rate, and quite frankly is just a very strong list. Now a lot of decks are trying to use Loki and Quinjet to kind of burst out kind of a lot of power. We got decks that are using Sasquatch, we'll talk about shortly. I mean, there's a lot of Aram, let's be honest. But ultimately, what's interesting about the Sandman deck is it does do a great job of shutting down decks where it really is the only one in an advantageous position given the Sandman treatment. I really like the use of Captain Marvel here, Miss Marvel as well to get that additional power out, often activated by the Doctor Doom. This deck pretty much has everything, and it's also a place where Makari is having an impact because, again, it's added power onto the board, especially if you top decker and Sandman's in effect. So a very interesting deck and one that is starting to make a little bit of waves in the meta. A very, very strong cube rate at 0.48. We go to number 9 here, and it's Zoo. We have a weekend mission for Gilgamesh, and if you want to play some Gilgamesh, this is where you're going to do it. Mockingbird, Gilgamesh, Blue Marvel, and of course Shadow King is massive here. Shadow King is a silent winner in the current meta given the amount of Thena. The only risk here is that you don't have much of a counter towards Darkhawk specifically, which is being played a lot. In Aram, you're able to kind of, I think Aram's a pretty favorable matchup here. It's not crazy the way like a Darkhawk package will be, but it's okay because like they often, they might be able to rogue your Khazar or rogue your Blue Marvel, but it's important you split up your Dazzler, Khazar, and Blue Marvel into separate lanes to prevent like an Enchantress from wiping them all out. That's the one major consideration you're going to want to have. But ultimately, Destroy is not being played all that much this week. It's almost, I don't want to say non-existent, but it's not being played as often, which gives Zoo a little more room to breathe. So a 56% win rate and a solid cube rate at 0.38, given the meta circumstances that this deck finds itself in. Going to number 8, we have Sasquatch. Now a very strong cube rate at 0.41, a win rate at 56%. It's a very good deck. From a play rate perspective, in terms of games played, people just aren't playing Sasquatch. It looks like, this type of deck with Sasquatch, despite its high performance, is just not catching on in terms of popularity. That's interesting to me because I think that there's a lot of really good cards in here in Athena, Kitty Pryde, and Angela. Now, the one risk here, which I personally don't like, is running Morph. Now, I understand the idea of running Morph, but in the current meta where you're seeing lots of Aram, Morph to me feels like a risk because you really don't know what kind of garbage they're holding in their hand, unfortunately, right? So Morph in this deck feels like a bit of a kind of chance that might not be worth taking. So I leave it up to you to decide, how you'd want to replace them. But I mean, in a Ravonna deck, it could be as easy as just putting a Wolfsbane in, honestly. And I mean, that might sound like coping, but it gets discounted by Ravonna, and you have a pretty good board presence with the Angela and the Kitty Pryde, which you can use to proc that Wolfsbane at your convenience. So I do think this deck has potential. It's obviously statistically very strong, but not as popular as some of the others on this list. That takes us to number 7, and this is kind of this new variation of Darkhawk. Now, we're seeing a lot of experimentation with Darkhawk because it's so effective at crushing Aram. Now, this here currently has a surprisingly low cube rate at 0.26, lower than I would have expected, but I wanted to showcase it because it is a unique take on Darkhawk as a whole. You have these activators for Darkhawk in Korg Rockslide. You also have the activators for the Athena, Angela, and Kitty Pryde package. And then, of course, you've got the Loki side where it's Agent Coulson and Loki. And Snowguard. So the idea here is like you took these 3 packages and you slammed them together perfectly into one deck. You often see like 2 packages being put together, like an Annihilus package and something else, and etc., etc. But you got like these 3 packages being slammed into this deck here, which I thought was pretty interesting. The win rate at 57 is legit. The cube rate lower than I would think, especially given the meta circumstances where Darkhawk should be absolutely crushing. And it is. And we'll be talking about the deck that it has the highest cube rate this week momentarily. That takes us to number 6, and it's the perennial just deck that probably no one really wants to play but continues to be an absolute high-end performer, and it's Namora on reveal. 57% win rate, 0.38 cube rate. Again, a relatively low number of games on this deck compared to some of the others, but the win rate and the statistics are awesome. This has been a very consistent deck since essentially Namora came out. You got the Namora win condition, you have the White Tiger Wong Odin win condition. You just have win conditions all over the place, and it just doesn't see much play. And so I think it's because obviously a lot of people didn't buy Namora, and that's fine, of course. But I really want to highlight that this deck is truly performing at a high rate, and we're not seeing a lot of Cosmo, right? Cosmo's not on the minds of people. Now, Cosmo's actually going to make one of our top decks that we're going to be talking about, but we're not seeing Cosmo very frequently as a tech card. So these Wong Namora and Wong White Tiger Odin combinations feel like they have just room to breathe, right? So that's part of the reason why I think the cube rate and the win rate are so impressive on this Namora on reveal deck. That takes us to the top 5, and top 5 we do have the highest cube rate deck of the week. Now, I've been talking a lot about this deck. We do have the Darkhawk at a 57% win rate and a 0.59 cube rate, which is remarkably high. Yesterday, it was at a 0.6 cube rate at a 58% win rate. The deck is just smashing. It's doing really, really well. Now, I actually covered decks similar to this in yesterday's gameplay video, where I actually made some modifications to this particular shell, which I actually tend to like better. But statistically, this is currently one of the absolute leaders in the meta. If you're looking to counter Darkhawk, this is where you'd go. There are some risks associated with this particular style of deck, because if you want to just go all in on countering countering Aram, if you don't match against Aram, you don't have any Darkhawk activators here, right? You don't have the Korgs or the Rockslide, so there's some inherent risk there. Although the Mysterios and etc. will activate your Mockingbird. So anyways, this is an absolute insane deck to play given the popularity of Aram, but be wary going into next week. We're going to have 2 new cards coming out next week, given the new season rollover, and when that happens, people will be playing the new cards, and Aram's going to drop off in popularity, despite still seeing play, of course, and a deck like this might be much more risky. This is definitely a meta call for this week, given Aram being as popular as it is. So just bear that in mind as we move into the top 4. And coming in at number 4, we do have Eternal Loki. Eternal Loki is a very fascinating deck because what it does is it actually cuts something like the Angela from the Kitty Pryde Athena package, includes something like a Nocturne, and a lot of tech in the form of Mobius and Red Guardian, which is great for countering the likes of the opposing Quinjets despite having your own Quinjet. But most notably about this deck is the addition of Blink, which allows you to play something like a Red Guardian, knock out someone's Athena or whatever it happens to be, and then blink that Red Guardian, and it always hits Loki because Loki's the 4 cost in the deck. If you happen to have Loki in your hand and you're holding Blink, well, then you could just Loki it away. So it gives this opportunity to more reliably hit Loki, which is obviously your core win condition in a deck like this. With the Snow Guard, with the Cable, with the Coulson, you generally have a lot of that hand generation. Kitty Pryde often coming back and forth in your hand. You could swap the Kitty Pryde if you want, but often you're using it as Athena activator. But it's really that Blink to guarantee the hit on the Loki, which makes this deck a top performer. The statistics are strong, and if you're looking for a kind of thoroughbred Loki style deck, this is definitely one of the ones that you can turn to. And that takes us into our top 3. And before we talk about Aram here, if you're not subscribed yet, consider hitting that subscribe button. We're on our way to 100,000 subscribers, and we can only get there, my friends, you are subscribed. I would sincerely appreciate it, all joking aside. It does sincerely mean a lot to me. And Aram at a 59% win rate is performing very well with this particular deck. The cube rate, however, is low, 0.20. A lot of the Aram decks are struggling to get into that 20 cube rate range, which honestly is really low. And I think this is because a couple things. One, the snap conditions aren't obvious with Aram decks. You don't know what you're going to draw. You got these weird ass mirror matches where you don't know what they're going to draw. They're unpredictable matches, which create these low cube equity situations. And then you have like, oh, there's so many mirror matches, let's just include a Darkhawk, because why wouldn't we, right? But ultimately, this deck is trying to do a lot of different things, but it does a couple things really well. Namely, it has the hand generation that you need. Quinjet's great with Agent Coulson because you can obviously use those cards effectively. You can Loki them away. Quinjet's great here. Legion, a Loki absolute winner in Aram decks. Phenomenal card. The amount of surprise factor you can get on turn 4 is just insane, especially if you like White Widow and then you Legion a Luke's Bar on turn 4. Like, they just lose that location. They probably just lose the game. Blob, absolutely incredible in Aram. It does provide some counterplay to the Darkhawks. It's just a great deck, right? It's a great deck. And of course, Rogue being used to disrupt other Quinjets, but often being held later into the game to take out your opposing Darkhawks, which are being used to counter Aram themselves, right? So you got a lot of good things here. Aram, I mean, we never know what Aram's going to get, but this is currently the highest win rate version of Aram. But I will note that we had a much higher cube rate version with that Uatu Umbaku Aram deck that I featured as the bonus right at the top, okay? So that one had a higher cube rate. This one has a slightly higher win rate. This one here has way more games played. The other one has less game played. So I just want to show you both. If it was me, I'm playing the Uatu Umbaku one. So anyways, coming in number 3. Number 2, we got a couple surprises here, and number 2 is Mill and Disrupt at a 59% win rate and a 0.34 cube rate. This was a surprise to me. Untapped is absolutely clarifying that this deck is performing exceptionally well. We do got the Cannonball, Dr. Octopus, Red Hulk combination here. We got the Magic, we got the Yondus, we got the Spider. There's a little bit of everything here, and it's Zemo Disruption. I did not personally expect to see Zemo this high, especially given what the meta circumstances are. But I guess with so much experimentation around Aram, I mean, this deck just wins. It just puts up points. It just it takes valuable stuff out of the deck, right? And you never know what's waiting in their deck, right? You Yondu something cheap, and then you Baron Zemo like a, whatever it happens to be, and they have no idea what you're pulling from their deck because they don't know what's in their Aram deck itself. So a lot of very interesting stuff here. The one thing that I caution with, especially against Aram, if they have like a Quinjet on the board, you want to hold the Maximus. Maximus can be a loss condition if you play your Maximus and then they just draw cards, which can be difficult for Aram. They have all that extra energy, but they need that card generation. And if you draw into their Coulson for them on Loki, then you probably just lose, right? So honestly, a very surprise performer at 59% win rate. Like, this is surprise performer, but these are what the stats show. And we report on the statistics, damn it. Just like we're going to be showcasing deck number 1, and I can barely believe it. It was a Silver Surfer deck, statistically at 60% win rate and a 0.46 cube rate. Absolutely insane. I double checked the stats. They were 100% confirmed. And this is wild to me. This deck features Fastos. It features Makari. You got Absorbing Man. We have no use of Sarah in this deck. It's interesting. It's incredibly interesting. And Cosmo makes its way out. So, like, there's a lot to really like about this deck. I think that the Mobius and Mobius splash is very well timed, considering the amount of Quinjet we're seeing out there, with the amount of Aram and Loki play we're seeing. But I mean, listen, the stats just don't lie. Like, it surprises me to see this deck performing as well as it is. I'm going to be personally testing this a lot this coming weekend because I'm just interested in seeing this new phase of Silver Surfer with this eternal kind of splash of Fastos Makari. But I mean, these are what the stats are showcasing here, right? I'm surprised. I'm sure you are as well. But regardless, guys, thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. Hit the like button if you haven't hit it already, and we'll see you on that next Marvel Snap video.